Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Soul Survivor podcast. I'm Dylan Burd here with my co host Ryan Winthrop. We don't have Jordan here with us again today due to the displacement from all the virus. He doesn't have his mic with him, so we're gonna have to figure that out in the coming weeks. However, we want to jump right in because this was an incredible episode, easily the best one we've had this season. There was just so much that went down, so many shocking moves. I'm still shook from it, Ryan.
Wow, wow. All I have to say is wow. Normally I come up with some kind of quippy line from the episode like, oh, the Poker Alliance or the Tony's Ladder or the Spy Shack, but no, I have nothing quippy. I just have to say, wow. I am in complete shock. What an episode in terms of strategy, big moves, funny moments. This was the best episode of the season so far.
Yeah, and we're gonna do our normal thing where we go based on the timeline of the episode in terms of our recap, but I'm going to make sure that we move it along and really focus the right amount of time on the insane moves that happened and the strategy that went on, because this episode was just so perfect in showing strategy. Everyone was saying that they needed to cut back the time on Edge of Extinction in order to show the most strategy possible. And when they went to the immunity challenge at like 9 minutes into the episode, I was like, all right, finally here it is. We're about to see a ton of strategy, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, I think not only did we see the pace pick up in this episode, I think this picked up the pace of the season because now we're seeing an evolution of strategy. And I'm sure we're going to go into this as we get more into fire token bargaining, but we're seeing tokens being used for more than just, okay, I give this many tokens for an advantage and that's it. Now we're looking to bargain social moves and strategic moves in the game for tokens. So it's evolving week to week. So who even knows what we'll bring next week, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll get it kicked off here. So the episode starts off. Ben connects with Sarah and Sophie, leaving Adam in the outs. So this was actually, I thought that the editing in the last 2 weeks has been a little bit predictable. Like, it seems like Rob was going to go out pretty much the entire episode as long as they lost last week, and that's exactly what happened. This week, I thought that the first scene with Ben and Adam was pretty much setting up for an Adam or Ben boot. And I thought going into the episode that there was absolutely no chance that Yara would win immunity. I know that ended up happening. But, this was a scene that, I don't think was very meaningful, but I think it was more of a indirect. It was just to direct us in a different direction. Adam seemed like he was on the outs because it seemed like Ben was, meshing with the girls a little bit more, which is probably a very good move for Ben. But, we'll see. I assume that there's only one more tribal before merge, so who knows if it's even going to matter at this point.
Yeah, two quick points on that actually. I agree with your first point that basically it kind of felt like they were setting up, Yara going to tribal council because they brought this up, but then again, it makes sense that the underdog tribe wins this challenge. I feel like in Survivor we usually see the underdogs pull out a win sometimes in situations like this. But I kind of disagree with the second point, actually. I feel like this may have not meant anything this episode because we got two big vote outs on Sele and Dakal. But for all we know, this could be setting up next week. For all we know, this upcoming week, Yara is going to go to tribal council and Adam's going to be on the outs. And either Adam goes or Adam thinks he's going to pull Ben back into the fold and then Sarah or Sophie whip out an advantage. So I think at the moment it didn't mean anything, but I think might actually pay off as soon as next week, possibly.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens with that. Obviously not going to touch much more on Yara this episode, this podcast, aside from winning immunity, because it doesn't really matter right now for this episode, as you said. But anyway, now they go to Edge of Extinction for the first time in 2 episodes, and of course there's a riddle to find an advantage, which Tyson, who found it, had to gift to another player, and he very cleverly, Tyson figures out the clue. I thought it was a clue that was extremely, extremely tough to figure out, and he seemed to just understand it. Now, we obviously don't know how long it took for them to figure that out.
Yeah.
But, very good for him.
Did you, I'm curious, did you figure out that it was the tide? I knew it wasn't I think the whole Danny thing, and I feel bad for Danny because she's a winner and I know she's a really good social player, but they're just painting her to be kind of just there right now. I feel like when she was saying, oh, we have to turn over every rock, I'm like, well, it's obviously not turning over every rock. But when the clue said the right place at the right time, I actually thought it was like, the position of the sun, and maybe the sun would cast a shadow on a rock on a certain point. I actually didn't pick up on the tide at all, so that was actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, I didn't really listen to the wording directly except for the stones, so I really didn't know what it was. I knew that obviously turning over every stone
Hmm.
wasn't the catch to it. But I think the big story here was that Parvati, who seemed to have a ton of power already, aside from being down in the numbers, but in terms of having 4 fire tokens, she's the one who gets gifted the idol nullifier, which, could have been extremely powerful had it been gifted to another tribe tonight. But
It's
but
true.
uh but yeah, Tyson gifts it to her. She buys it because it's only worth 1. And now she had the idol nullifier and 3 fire tokens. So, as this is going on, before I knew they were going to tribal, I'm like, all right. I'm like, she could use those 3 fire tokens as some kind of tool in order to help her get, recover today. Obviously, that didn't happen, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But it was definitely interesting right at the beginning of this episode.
Yeah, I think that she made the right call here. I'm not sure if she considered using her 3 remaining tokens to buy an idol, because then she would have an idol and a nullifier. Because if I'm thinking like Parvati, if I didn't get the nullifier from Tyson, then I have 4 tokens and I'm on the outs. I'm spending 3 tokens then just so I have some type of tool in my back pocket. If I'm given a tool for only 1 token and I can still keep 3 for a later point, I'm going to save those and see if I can use the nullifier. So I don't blame her for not buying a token. I don't think in one episode you should go from 4 to 0. I feel like that's wasting way too much, stock in your tokens. But yeah, I knew once Tyson found it, he was going to give it to Parvati because he and Rob are tight, and Rob and Parv were tight, so I knew it was going to go to her. And I think had like Wendell had an idol or Yule had an idol for Wendell, this could have played out better. So I think that she didn't misplay anything. I think this is just an unfortunate situation for her.
So, one thing I was gonna say, are we 100% sure that an idol is worth 3 if you're just paying fire tokens?
I went back and looked at it. I'm pretty sure an advantage is 3 tokens. At least on the edge of extinction, if you pay 3 tokens, like Tyson said, you pay 3 tokens, you get an idol. That's good when you get back into the game.
Okay.
I think in the game, 3 tokens is worth either an idol or it's worth a challenge advantage. It's worth something for the number 3. So either way, I feel like Parvati spending 1 on a nullifier and 3 on an advantage to blow all 4 may have been a little bit too aggressive, I think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously hindsight is 2020, but look, maybe she did think that in the end she was going to end up pulling Nick over to them, and that's why she didn't do
Mm-hmm.
it. Maybe she did think that was the case going to the tribal, but I'm honestly pretty surprised she didn't consider buying an idol, and maybe she did and they didn't show it, but you have to think that even though fire tokens are going to end up being so powerful, at some point when you're down in the numbers, you just got to make sure you get through the vote. And again, maybe she did think she was more comfortable than she was because of Nick, but I think I would have definitely considered it. And we don't know. Maybe she did consider it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we'll have to see how it plays out. All I think is that I'll go with the prediction that she was maybe going to buy one had she not received that advantage. And then once she got one, maybe she was like, maybe I can sit on the rest for now. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and then slight weird thing that happened is Tyson spending that 1 token to buy peanut butter instead of keeping it for a challenge advantage.
See, but
I
like,
couldn't.
wait, but is it weird? It's tight. I feel like this makes perfect sense for Tyson. If Natalie or anyone else does this, I'm saying, why are you wasting a token? But because it's Tyson, I'm not even questioning it, honestly.
Yeah, they didn't even make it seem like the edit didn't even make it
No.
seem like it was a non-normal thing. Like it was a normal thing for Tyson. And I mean, look, it can end up being used as an advantage if it gives him enough energy to win the challenge. So we'll have to see what happens.
All I'm gonna say is I'm gonna feel very bad for Natalie if she's worked so hard to get 4 tokens. Just to say, Jeff, I have 4 tokens. I want to buy 4 advantages in the comeback challenge. Tyson just crushes it no matter what. I think that will be so funny, but I'll feel bad. But also, I wouldn't be surprised either because I think somebody on Twitter, I forgot who it was, went back and looked at like tribal immunity wins and individual wins. And I think Tyson has one of the best winning ratios of all time. If you look at tribe wins and also individual wins, he's just an amazing natural competitor. So he does. I don't think he even needs it, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. Again, we can't judge it until we actually see what happens in the challenge.
Yeah.
Um, if it's something as big as getting a second live in a challenge that maybe is a hold whatever as long as you could, then that is completely different because the second live is basically, it's extremely huge. Then having to untie 2 knots instead of 4 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends what that advantage would be. But let's just move on from that because again, not a huge moment in this episode, even though it's pretty pretty funny and interesting. We had the immunity challenge. As I said before, I did not expect Yara to be the winner. As you said, the underdog ended up coming through, and I don't think there was anything major to point out in this challenge other than the fact that Sophie has been absolutely killing it in challenges. She's been extremely impressive. She's one of the main reasons why, the tribes that she's been on so far, Dakar at the beginning and now this tribe now, why they have been successful in challenges. Just she's just incredible. I mean, dating back to the season that she won until now, just very underrated challenge player for sure.
Listen, I've always been a big Sophie Clark fan. I know Jordan is not the biggest Sophie fan. We'll actually bring up another take from Jordan later in this podcast, but I've always been a big Sophie fan. She's underrated. I like Coach. Coach is a great player, but I think Sophie's very underrated. And she did win 3 individual immunities in her first season. She not only won a physical challenge, she won a question-based challenge, and then she won a puzzle. So Sophie's a very versatile challenge competitor, and we've seen, like you said, Dylan, this season, she's crushed the puzzles. She did a whole thing with the whole dexterity moving maze thing. So yeah, Sophie's gonna crush it. I think as of right now, she's slated to make the merge at this point, and unless you're looking at Sophie as a big threat, Sophie can make a huge run at this.
Yeah, I completely agree, but I want to get right to the strategy here, and
please.
what we'll talk about the rest of this podcast. Obviously, it goes to Sele first, and the immediate name that's thrown out is Parvati, and we knew this was going to happen for sure. But I'm pretty surprised that Wendell was just so like, we're throwing 3 on Parvati and that's it. It wasn't really a lot of thought into it. I understand that Parvati is a huge threat, but if you're Wendell, you have to be thinking like, she could have an idol. And I know he did say that, but something that I thought could have happened going into this episode was I would not have been surprised to see them all throw votes on Michelle instead of Parvati, maybe bracing for the fact that Parvati is more likely to have the advantage, and at least if they're going to stay up in the numbers, they got to make sure they get someone out. So that was something I was just, I mean, look, again, maybe they thought this through, we don't know, but I was surprised not to see that conversation had. It seemed like Parvati was that main target the whole time.
Yeah, I feel like we need to listen to interviews after the season and see what the thought process is from either Yule, Nick, or Wendell. And I think you're right, actually. I think in a regular season of new players or even of random all-stars, I think you're right. We have a big threat and a lesser threat. You might throw the votes on the lesser threat because they're like less likely to have an idol and they will not see it coming as much. But I think the one caveat is that this is all winners. And when you have a shot at Parvati, one of the greatest to ever play, it's so tempting to not take it. It's just so tempting to not take it. So, I mean, I think in a regular season, Michelle would have been like, let's throw votes on Michelle. Like, she'll never see it coming over Parvati. But I think this time, Parvati, like Rob, just was down in the numbers from the swap, not just in terms of the color, but in terms of the actual people themselves. I think she just had a bad position to start with. And I mean, maybe the vote was less close than we thought, and she was doomed anyway. But it was just tough. I mean, she really had to work every angle she could.
Yeah, and I want to give you credit because on our last podcast that we recorded on Monday, you said that you thought Wendell would be in trouble because if Parvati and Michelle were going to pull somebody over and try to get the numbers, it would be Nick as the person that would be trying pulled over, and that's exactly what happened. I, for most of the episode, thought that Nick was going to end up voting with them, and I'm sure he was heavily considering it. But Wendell just seemed very, and I know that the etiquette paint the picture a certain way, but I know Wendell's has seemed very off character these last few episodes, and I know that they're just trying to hype up the beef maybe between Michelle and Wendell, but Wendell just seemed so unwilling to work with anybody. The fact that he threw out the fire token idea to Parvati at camp was just such a crazy move because it gave Parvati that nugget that she needed in order to go run to Nick and be like, Wendell's really playing the game. Like, you want to come over and vote with us? So I was not. I think Wendell was probably panicking a little bit out of character for part of that episode, even though he always appears to be calm.
Yeah, no, I think at the end it's weird. I think in the first 4 episodes of the season before they swapped, or the first 5 episodes, I mean, we really didn't see that much from Wendell. We just saw a few confessionals here and there, but he seemed the same, lovable, shelter building, same Wendell as Ghost Island, but maybe a bit, faster with the alliances with the Outsiders Alliance. And then as soon as they have the storyline of Michelle and Wendell together, I think they just went for the jugular of Michelle is the one who was burned by the relationship. Wendell was the one that caused it. And I feel bad because I actually like Wendell as a player a lot, and I think the edit's been really negative. I don't know if this means he's going to go out next, if he's the merge boot. Maybe Wendell's our final three goat. Maybe Michelle's next to him and he gets crushed. I don't know what's going to happen, but all I'm going to say is I think that the edit's looking really bad for him, so I need to see how he turns it around. Um, and yeah, like you said, I think it was a bold play for him to go for the fire token bargaining, like we said earlier. I think that it's way too risky of a move, especially on a tribe of five. I know he's close with Wendell and Nick, but when you have that few people, Parvati, all she has to do is just run back to Nick and Yule and say, Wendell's being very flaky with his vote. He could just vote you out tonight for tokens. I feel like a lot of players would get scared and vote with Parvati because they got scared. Unfortunately for her, Yul Kwan is such a godfather strategist that he's not going to budge. But I think she made the right play here. I think Parvati, we're seeing why Parvati's an amazing player because she played this so perfectly, even if it didn't work.
Yeah, I want to go right to tribal now for Sele, and then we'll go back to the car.
Sure.
But basically, I was shocked that it came up again at tribal, the bargaining, but I think Parvati, she's almost like Rob in a sense, and I don't mean that they have the same attitude about them, but she's the type of person that can make anybody do what she wants, and that's why she's so good. And I thought that, look, if I don't know, maybe she thought she had Nick, her and Michelle, maybe she didn't, but maybe she thought that they were screwed. But the right play was really, really playing up Wendell as that villain at the tribal council to the point where she asked him like, "Oh, do you want to negotiate right now?" And I think that Nick was probably sitting there like, "Oh my God, like I don't know what's going on." And I got to give Nick so much credit in this episode because the fact that he stuck to his gut and was able to just get emotions out of it and just stick with the three guys. Incredible move for him because who knows what would have happened to him had he flipped. And look, obviously, we may look later in the season and say maybe it would have been better for Nick to flip with them. But at least right now, that's a very strong trio they have. They do have the numbers going into the merge. It probably would not have been the right move for Nick to switch. But I just thought that it was incredible the way Parvati really just manipulated Wendell, it seemed like, at Tribal and just kind of made him look like the one in the wrong.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think that that's a big point that we're going to bring up in both of these tribals tonight, that we're going to talk about two great moves or people making great moves, but a move can really only be truly defined once you see the rest of the season play out. Because if you make a move, like here's a perfect example. Last season when Kelly takes out Jack and she masterfully manipulates the whole tribe to take out Jack, we were all saying Kelly's making a great play. She's amazing. And because of how great she is, she was the next one voted out at the merge. So I feel like you can look at a move in the moment. And yes, right now the move we'll see in Dakal's tribal later, and this tribe right now it's Sele with Nick sticking to his guns, like you said. I think they're great moves in the moment, and I do think in the end it was the right play. It was the good play for Nick to stay loyal. But for all we know, a few episodes from now, we could see it flip on him, and we could say maybe it wasn't so great after all. So I feel like a move can be defined in the moment, but then really determine how good it is once you see how it plays out moving forward.
Oh yeah, for certain. And Parvati gets taken out.
No.
Very, very, very upsetting for all the viewers out there who were definitely rooting for her to stay. And she gifts her 3 fire tokens to Michelle, who seems to gain more power and be in a better position each episode. Despite her being at the 3-1 deficit, I do think that her tribe does have the strength to probably get through what I believe is one more challenge before the merge. Obviously, that could change. They could do 2 more challenges before the merge. We don't really know what they're going to do. But we're speculating that based on the fact that there was no preview of the merge next week, that they're going to do 1 more vote out, and then once they get to 11, they'll have the challenge to get back in. 1 person will get back in, and they'll probably have a merge at around 12. So that's what we're speculating right now. I know we spoke about that, but does Michelle have 4 fire tokens now?
It's 4 now, yes.
So she's in a similar situation to what Parvati was, down in the numbers, but has the fire tokens. So maybe she's the one next week who decides she has to use her fire tokens on an advantage.
I agree with the speculation. I think right now we're looking at probably one more challenge, one more vote out, and then merge at 12 after someone comes back. But then again, they can merge at 10. They could not merge for a bit. I mean, this is winners at war. Anything can happen, but I think that's the most likely scenario. Last two quick things before we move on to Dakal. I mean, you're right. I think Parvati, she did such a good job painting Wendell in a certain light. Again, I think if this is not winners at war and these are not seasoned players, I think someone like Nick or Yule, who's in that spot, make the flip because they get scared. But I don't think it's going to work in winners at war. But no one should say Parvati played this wrong. Parvati played this so well. We saw why she's a great player. She just got swap screwed. And you're right. Michelle seems to get more power every week. I think we're seeing why Michelle is actually an underrated player and a winner because she has such a strong social game and she will get these tokens just because of how good she is socially. And I think, yeah, you're right. I think Sele is a strong tribe. I actually don't think they'll go to tribal next week. I think they'll make it through. And as long as Michelle makes them merge, she's going to find her footing and she'll be fine.
Yeah, for sure. And I would not even put it past, Nick and Michelle to maybe switch things up and work things out next week. You never know. I mean, obviously it seems like it wouldn't make sense for Nick to go with them and then flip, but like you never know what could happen. Anything could happen in these episodes.
No, that's true. I mean, I think that listen, if they do go to tribal next week, I think Michelle's screwed. But I just think in terms of the edit of the season, Michelle's kind of getting her redemption, her underdog edit right now, and I don't see them just going to tribal because they are a strong tribe physically. I don't see them going to tribal and just voting her out. It seems too easy. I think we're looking at Yara or Dakal going to tribal, probably Yara.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. And just to go to Dakal now,
Yeah.
switch
Wow.
things over to what will be remembered for a very long time as probably one of the best tribal councils, best vote outs, best moves in Survivor history. At least right now, we'll see what happens in the future episodes. But wow, 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 that's all I could say. And we'll just start to recap first what happened at camp before going to tribal, just to build up and talk about the huge move that did happen. They get back and Tony goes running off, of course, and I'm like, I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh boy, I'm like I literally said I'm watching. I was watching with my mom, my brother, and I said, oh boy, I said they're about to get back and he's about to go running through the forest. Like it's day 16, he's taking off like as soon as they get there.
Oh God, this is the Tony that I know and love. I know he's been holding it together for us. He's been trying so hard not to go crazy, and after 16 days, he's like, "I gotta go. I gotta go." And it's funny. Someone on Twitter was like, "Day one, Tony says, I can't play too hard. I can't have game changers happen again. I have to play low key." And then 15 days later, he's like, "No, I gotta go." And he just jumps into Spy Shack 2.0. So that was crazy.
And what makes it so incredible is that these players are so good is that they all had a feeling that Tony was in a spy shack.
And they knew
they
where
were
it was.
Sandra even mentions like, yeah, well, he did it by the well in his season, so like let's not talk by the well. And that's exactly what happened. They didn't talk by the well, and he didn't end up getting to hear anything. And everyone knows his deal by now, but obviously didn't work for Tony, and he kind of jumped out at a weird time also when Kim was like walking right by. So he did recover, and look, he could have been in trouble tonight, but he's lucky that Denise chose to spare him.
Listen. I am sad we lost Parvati. I'm sad that we lost Sandra. But I'm happy Tony stayed. I think he could have been in trouble tonight had Kim and Denise thought a different way. But yeah, like you said, the strategy here on Dakal was crazy because we see, Jeremy and Denise are on the bottom and they both, want us to stick together, but they're like, listen, if the three of you are going to stay Dakal strong, we have to just vote for each other because we're not going to make it through. And, I mean, it's never that simple. Then we start to see the bargaining happening. And then we also start to see, possibly Dakal flipping on each other.
And I thought it was a really, really weird moment just when the three of and there was major foreshadowing here, even though I don't think any of us saw the move that was coming, where Denise and Sandra and Kim were talking, and there was that small back and forth between Sandra and Denise where where Denise was like, I'm gonna vote you out tonight, like a joke. And Sandra was like, oh, you're such like a nice lady. Like, I want to let you know you're a nice lady. So like Sandra was actually looking at Denise, like every single one of us were at home. And Sandra was probably like, when she negotiated and said, I'll give you 2 tokens, or you give me 2 tokens, and I'll give you the idol for tonight. I don't think that there's any way that Sandra was probably like, Denise is like the nicest woman. There's no way she would ever like switch on me. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, I didn't think of it myself, but I know that you mentioned it and my brother mentioned it, and people were just like, people on social media were like, well, like really risky move for Sandra, but Sandra has that confidence where she always thinks she knows what she's doing, and most of the time she does. But this was just such a monumental move that Denise pulled off so perfectly, just so perfectly.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack here. Like you said, there was foreshadowing when Denise said, "I'm going to vote you out," and Sandra just laughed it off. And then we saw a confessional from each of them where Sandra's like, "Look, you know, I like Tony and Kim, but I don't think I can work with them long term. I think I can work with Denise. And you know what? If I work with her and she takes out one of the guys for me, it's no blood on my hands and I'm good. I can make it through and also get some tokens to boot." And then we see a confessional from Denise where she's like, I know Sam, and this is why Denise is so great, and this is why I love Winners at War. It's hard because we're losing so many, fan favorites, which is hard on us as fans, but we're also seeing some winners and we're seeing them evolve their game. And we're really seeing why they are winners. And even though Denise and Michelle and Sophie, they're all underrated, we're seeing them really come to light here. And Denise is so good socially. Granted, she's a therapist, but she's so good socially. And she also is so smart, picks up on the fact right away that I know Sandra wants to get no blood on her hands. I know she's looking to use me to take out one of her guys. And I'm not comfortable with that because Sandra is a big threat. And then we see, and I think this actually fell in Denise's lap, and Denise capitalized on it immediately. We see Sandra say, look, I'll give you the 2 tokens. Sorry, you give me your 2 tokens, and I'll give you the idol. And just like with Parvati and Wendell, you can't make that deal before tribal because they could just stab you in the back. So then Denise smartly goes to her and says, okay, I'll give you 1 now. You give me the idol, and as long as it's real and I test it tonight, I will give you idol number 2 at camp. So Denise completely nullifies, no pun intended.
Token number two. Token number 2.
Oh, sorry. Token number 2.
Yeah.
No, you're right. You're right.
Tokens and idols. So much going on here.
So much going on. Denise completely, no pun intended, nullifies Sandra and just completely lowers her guard and says, "Look, I'll work with you. Here are my tokens. I need the here's the idol for me." And at this moment, again, we didn't see this coming at all because it was not very apparent. So it was great editing. But Denise just played this so masterfully because at this point she has her pick of the litter of who to take out. And now she's the one that's taking out Sandra and saving her allies.
So first of all, this is a classic overplay by Sandra. She didn't think about the safety of herself and just basically put all of her trust in somebody else, and to the point where she wanted to do this in order to make sure that she had no blood on her hands. She didn't want to seem like she was the one making the move. Sometimes more simple is the way to go. Like, if she just played the idol, she lives another day. Like, it's as simple as that. But look, she tried to make the big move and make it seem like she had no blood on her hands, and Denise completely capitalizes. Now, I just want to shout out the edit here because, first of all, I want to just break down the way that, the votes went and tribal went. The votes are about to be read, and you see the pause by Jeremy before he gets up. I was like, oh boy, he's about to just dip out of here and just not make his vote. And if he doesn't make his vote, and he leaves, Denise is, and obviously at the time, like, everyone else would have thought, well, Denise is going home. Jeremy would have thought, well, Denise is going home. But he decides to make his vote. He has confidence that he won't be the one going home. Then you have Denise. As soon as Denise played that idol, I'm like, oh, like, she's taking out Tony. It's as simple as that. Even when she played it for Jeremy, I'm like, she's taking out Tony. It's as simple as that. And I think I got directed that way because I don't know if you remember, but Sandra was like telling Denise, like, oh, you get your pick of which guy goes home. So I'm thinking, oh, it's not going to be Kim. It's probably not going to be Sandra. It's going to be one of the guys that goes home. Then she decides to play the second idol for Jeremy and to make sure that, she keeps her ally right there. And I'm like, oh, Tony. And they kept panning back to Tony's face. And he was like so shocked. Tony thought it was him. They keep panning back, and then Sandra. And I'm like, that was the first time I jumped out of my seat over a vote in so long.
The edit, like you're right, the edit was so good. And I don't think any of us saw this scenario happening because you're right, keeping it simple is the way to go. I mean, I thought of two scenarios going into this week if Dakal went to tribal. Scenario A, this is the last night Sandra can play her idol. Denise and Jeremy try to make a big flip. They pull in Kim and they say, look, we're taking out Sandra tonight. And Sandra's like, you know what? Even if Sandra doesn't see it coming, she goes, it's the last night I can use it. Might as well use it. And even if she's like, oh my God, they all flipped on me, she's at least safe. I thought that was going to happen where Sandra plays her idol on the last night and she's good. Scenario two, and then I guess if Sandra plays her idol on herself, either Denise or Jeremy get voted out. Scenario two, which is what I didn't want to happen, is Advantage Geddon, where Jeremy leaves, Denise plays an idol, Sandra plays an idol, Kim plays an idol, and Tony goes by default. So I thought one of those two was going to happen tonight. So you're right. The edit was so well done. I didn't see this coming at all. And I think it's because I just didn't think Sandra would do this. I think that Sandra did overplay here. Again, Sandra's an amazing player. This is not a knock against Sandra as a player and against her legacy. She'll always be a iconic player, but I do think this is like a JT level of trying to overplay or not thinking everything through because there's no reason to give Denise an idol. Like at the very least, try to change the terms of the negotiation. At least say, look, I'm not going to give you my idol, or don't even tell her you have an idol, but like, I'm not going to give an idol. You give me one token, I will vote with you tonight. As long as you see that I voted with you, I get the second token. So I feel like she should have started wheeling that back more instead of jumping to, I'll give you the idol. Because then Denise is like, I can just vote you out. I mean, this is kind of like was a mix of Parvati playing two idols in her season, but also a mix of Sarah voting out Sierra and taking her advantage. It was like a mix of the two of them combined.
And it's just like this is just what's going to happen when you have a new twist like this with the fire tokens where people don't
Yeah.
really know how to play it. Like Sandra clearly was overvaluing the tokens compared to her own life in the game. And another thing I want to mention is that I did see a lot of social media being like, okay, great move, but Denise wasted an idol on Jeremy. My answer to that is no, she didn't. Even though the votes appear like that, and technically she didn't have to do it, you don't know what Sandra was going to do. Sandra, if she was smart in this scenario, she would have thrown a vote on either Jeremy or Kim or Tony, one of the three, to make sure that if she it to basically she'd be making sure she'd be hedging her bet. She'd be making sure, well, if Denise does turn on me and vote me, at least somebody else has a vote.
Yeah,
And
and yeah, you're
go
right.
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say you're completely right because this is exactly what happened if you saw Ben's season, Heroes, Hustlers. That do you remember Devin?
Yes.
That this is exactly what Devin did at the final five. He basically said, I know Ben's gonna play an idol. I'm gonna throw a random vote on Dr. Mike. And it turns out that they all vote for Devin, including Ben. And then because Devin votes for Mike, it's 1-1, and then Mike goes home on the revotes. If Devin doesn't do that, he's out. So I think you're right. You have to hedge your bets. And if it's such a small tribe of like five, and let's just say you all are going to vote for one person, you have to hedge your bet and throw your vote on someone else because then it could be you.
Right. And this way, um, if that one vote were to be on Jeremy, then it wouldn't just be a revote where Jeremy goes home because they don't have the numbers. So she basically made sure that if Sandra were to put the vote on Jeremy to hedge her bet, then at least that
Yep.
would Sandra would still go home. Jeremy would say. Now, obviously, Sandra could have thrown the vote on Tony. She could have thrown the vote on Kim just to make sure, but again, she was so hell bent on not wanting to have blood on her hands that she just basically threw away her vote to make sure that didn't happen. Now, one other thing I want to mention, and this will go largely, I don't want to say unnoticed, but largely unmentioned, is the fact that Kim, in what seemed like two idols were already on the board, Kim sat back, stayed calm, and didn't play the idol, which I think was, and look, Kim was in a great position, but I think it was definitely hard to do for her. Probably like just like a very logical Kim type thing to just sit back and say, I'll be okay, no need to overreact. And I thought that there was a chance she was just gonna play it and be like, I don't know what's going on. I'm just gonna play the idol. But look, she got out of this tribal not only safe, but she does have an idol still.
And this is why Kim Spradlin is so great. And I think this is I'm so glad that we're seeing Kim get more airtime and she's playing more because she was at such a deficit with the Poker Alliance and she was on the bottom for a while. And again, we haven't seen in her first season, we don't see Kim on the bottom. Kim is on the top the entire time. And now I feel like it's kind of like a reverse story. She's now on the bottom. She's now in the middle, and I feel like she'll eventually get her way back up to the top. And you're right; it would have been really easy and trigger happy to say, "I see two idols played. I'm going to play my idol." But I think Kim realizes in that moment, okay, let's not panic. If Jeremy and Denise are now both safe, the only people that can go home tonight are me, Tony, and Sandra. And then if you saw last episode when they swapped, yeah, last episode, Kim and Denise had a conversation in the woods, and they said, I want to work with you. And I think they want to work together. So I think Kim is confident, okay, it's not going to be me. I have a feeling Denise and Jeremy have their sights on either Sandra or Tony as bigger threats than I am right now. And I think she's like, you know what, I'm going to play it safe and hold back. And I think her read was correct. She read the cards and she said, no pun intended, she read the cards. And she was like, I have a close connection with Denise, so I'm just going to sit on this idol. So good for her.
Yeah, good for her. And what a great, and we'll mention the one person that we haven't really spoke about a lot right now, Tony. Not, it was a perfect tribal for him, mainly like not because of his doing, just because he didn't go home, but at the same time, but Sandra's idol and Denise's idol don't get used against him, which is huge because now the only idol left on that tribe is Kim, and I know Jeremy does have the advantage where he could just leave tribal. What is it? It's called immunity without power. Is that what it's
I
called?
think it's called safety without power.
Safety without power, right? So those two advantages are still left, but I think Jeremy's probably going to try and save that to the merge unless completely necessary. So if they were to go back to tribal, he's definitely. I know it right now. It's 2-2 numbers, and you never know if Kim could flip over maybe and work with Denise and Jeremy to get
I
Tony
think
out.
she will. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like that was a possibility in the preview, but Tony has a lot less advantages that could be potentially working against him, and there's no chance of having the advantage again, as people would call it.
Yeah.
So that's for sure. That's good for him.
Yeah, no, I think honestly, and this goes back to what I said earlier, and you touched upon this a lot. We're analyzing moves in the moment. We're saying this move from Denise was like a top 10 amazing, big, flashy, great move. And then we're also saying, Nick made the right move as well. And we're saying that in the moment, as of this episode, they are the correct moves to make. We'll have to see in the next few episodes if it worked out as intended. And if so, they really were great moves. If not, maybe they lose a little bit of like shine. But no, in the moment, I think this is, again, just to wrap it up, a great move by Denise. And I think you're right. Tony also benefits from this because even though he loses an ally in Sandra, we see the confessional where she says, look, I like Tony, but he's going to flip on me at some point and I have to strike first or I can't let that happen. There's a very high chance they get to the merge and Sandra's going around saying Tony's the merge boot. So I think that Tony, even though he loses an ally in the short term, I think that he may have dodged a bullet down the line. And now without Sandra, Tony is a little bit less threatening and he doesn't have an idol. So this could have been good for Tony too, honestly.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely, great for him, especially with Sandra talking that she did want to get him out sooner rather than later. Now, one other thing I'm going to mention here is that per Hef's request, I did want to give him credit for and I believe not last week's podcast, but the week before, he did say, he said, I feel like the next vote is either going to be Rob, Parvati, or Sandra. It ended up being Rob, so he got that right. And then he asked the people he pretty much named as possibilities for the next vote out, ended up going out bang, bang, next two. So good for him for calling that. Got to give him credit.
Yes, we had really quickly. We had a off podcast talk, and we did agree to give Hef credit because when he and I podcasted the night Tyson left, he said, "I feel like if there's a swap," he said, "Rob will go out, and then probably Parvati and Sandra in some order they're going to go out, maybe even in that order." So he was correct. Hef gets credit. But where Hef is wrong, and if he's on next week, I will have to address him directly about this. He said to me a whole thing about when he and I podcasted, basically that I said something along the lines of, I said Rob was going to be swap screwed, and Hef basically said, no, he's not going to be swap screwed. Basically, if you have the numbers, you're fine. And I said, no, if he doesn't have the numbers, he's not going to be okay. And even if he swaps with Adam and with Ben, even though you have Sophie and Sarah on the bottom, Adam and Ben aren't your numbers. They may come from the same color tribe as you in blue, but they're not your numbers. They're just going to flip over with Sophie and Sarah. So I want to say that he was swap screwed. Hef doesn't think he was swap screwed. He thinks that, they misplayed it. The only person that misplayed it was Sandra. Rob and Parvati were swap screwed.
Yeah, I do have to agree with you there. I pretty much read Rob going out as soon as the tribes were swapped last week, and Parvati, of course, was down in the numbers also. So I do have to agree with you there. Now, one other thing that I do want to mention. I know I keep saying one other thing, but there's just so much to talk about.
There's too many things.
Yeah, there's too much. Somebody did mention on Twitter, which was a really good catch, that the last 4 vote outs were all from the Villains tribe, and here's versus Villain: Tyson, Rob, Parvati, and Sandra, and they went out in the exact order that they finished in that season. Quite interesting.
That's again, Survivor gods have a way of working themselves out. And yeah, it's sad because I think people were saying, oh, we're losing Amber and Ethan and Danny. We're not losing enough big names. Well, now we just lost 4 big names, and it hurts a lot. So I guess you get what you wish for. I did, just to recap, though, I did find the exact quote from Jordan in our text thread. He basically said that I had said, and I quote, "The merge and the swap will help people who are on the bottom like Rob and Parvati," which is true if you have the numbers. If you don't have the numbers, then this merge and swap does not help you. So it's a situational claim. Jordan was right because he called the order, and he was correct that it did not help them, but that's only because the numbers didn't work out that way. It's a situational claim. And I'm glad that Dylan agrees with me. So there we go.
And hopefully next week, Hef will be back that we could talk about this. But should be an interesting debate. Yeah, and I believe after tonight we've lost, if I'm calculating right, aside from Yule, we've lost all the old school players. Is that correct?
We have lost every player. I'm going to look at my handy dandy fact sheet. We have lost every player that is pre Heroes versus Villains. So like the early days of the game, we have lost every player except for Yule. So I'm hoping that Yule, especially with last week's segment on Jonathan and Stacy, I'm really hoping Yule makes an end run and gets the money. But old school big players are a dying breed nowadays, Dylan.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it definitely makes a difference, the fact that all these new school players watched them growing up, and all these old school guys have played so many times that they're just viewed as gods, even for the new, even not only for the fans, even for the new school players, that they're just viewed as the biggest threats, no matter what was going to happen. Like, I know, a guy like Tony is grouped in with them. Jeremy's sometimes grouped in with them as huge threats just because they were so dominant in their seasons. But a lot of these new school guys, people from seasons 32 and on, Michelle, Adam, Ben, those guys, Wendell, those guys are looking at the old schoolers as literal like Survivor gods. Like, we got to get them out. They're the biggest threats. And I think that's just the way that new school defeated old school. It's just the perception.
I do have to say one quick last thing. I know this is going on a bit, but are you shocked? And maybe this is a testament to why Jeremy is sometimes in that group of all-time greats of like Parvati, Rob, Sandra, like those. Are you shocked that Jeremy still does not have a single vote yet? And even though his name was thrown around this episode, I actually think he was in no danger. I think it was either going to be Tony, Sandra, or Denise the whole time. Like, Jeremy is so good, not just physically, but like socially and strategically, that he doesn't have a single vote yet. I'm knocking on wood because I don't want to lose him. But he's so good in every way in this game. He's kind of like Sarah, where he really is just good at all aspects of the game. And I'm just floored he hasn't even really been a target yet.
Yeah, I mean, that's Jeremy's game, right? Like, he's that big threat that's sitting in front of your face, but for some reason nobody views him as a big threat in real time. So that's Jeremy's game.
and it's crazy to me because not only Dylan is he such a great player that these winners should know he's a great player because of how he plays with meat shields, and he's very strategic and very social. Let's think back to his story. He won in Second Chance because of his amazing game. He's a great physical, social, strategic player. And then on top of all that, he's a firefighter with a wife and 2 kids and a baby on the way. Now he's all that, but with a wife and 4 kids. So I don't know how they're not looking at Jeremy. Again, he was my first draft pick in my friend's draft. I'm hoping that he takes the win for me. But yeah, I just think Jeremy's amazing, honestly.
What about Tony? Does he have any votes against him? He doesn't, right?
I actually can look this up after the podcast, but I'm pretty sure Tony does not have a vote against him because in Amber's tribal, no. In Tyson's tribal, no. And then not right now. Yeah, I think Tony also has no votes against him currently.
Look,
Maybe one rogue vote, but not many.
gotta give him credit for that. I know that.
Because he was right. He lowered his threat level. He was lowering the shield, and then he's going to strike. So.
All I have to say is that the better the as soon as Tony gets to the merge, that's just going to be so huge for his game because right now, like, there's nowhere to hide. You have 4 people left on your tribe. If you lose again, like, he's in major trouble. Like, they're like if you're in a tribe of 4 people and Tony's on your tribe, there's an easy target probably. No matter unless like I know, and I'm not devaluing Jeremy and Kim. It's just Tony's just so much louder and prominent. I don't even want prominent's the wrong word, but just louder and just more in your face. Like, he's there. He's the guy if you're in a tribe of 4 and you lose. So, hopefully for him, he doesn't go to tribal next week. And if he doesn't, who knows what can happen once the merge hits.
I understand what you're saying. I think the word you're looking for is character. Like,
right.
They're all amazing players. Tony, Kim, and Jeremy, they're all incredible players. But who's the best TV character? There's no greater Survivor character than Tony. Tony's just so amazing from a TV perspective. So they're all playing great games. Just you don't get more good TV than Tony Vlachos.
And if you're Jeremy and you do win immunity next week, who's a better person to play with in terms of Jeremy's strategy than Tony?
Yeah, and look, I know we shouldn't read too much into the edit or too much into the preview, but we had a clip of Tony running down the beach and Jeremy's like he's too risky. He's too risky. I think it's a misdirect. I don't think we lose Tony next week. I'm hoping Yara goes to Tribal Council and we lose either Ben or Adam, but that's my wishful thinking. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I completely agree with that. But I think that pretty much does it for tonight's podcast. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on Twitter. Would love to interact with fans and talk more about this because it was just such a fascinating episode and just honestly one that we'll look back on so many years in the future, no matter what happens. Because even if Denise, let's say this move doesn't work out for Denise and she does get unlucky and go out in a few tribals, this is the night where fire tokens came to life. And I think that will be the way this episode's remembered, plus that outstanding move by Denise.
Yeah, I think, like you said, in the end, this is such a historic season because we're never going to get all winners again. We're never going to get a cast like this again. Most of these players probably will never play this game ever again. So I think we have to just take these moments and enjoy them while they last. And like you said, whether Denise wins the game, whether she gets screwed over next week by this play, you can't take this away from her. She made a Parvati-style double idol play while also taking out Sandra in a Sarah-style play, and she dethroned the queen. So no matter what, Denise will go down in the books for this, no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, it is @SoulSurvivorPod. We'll get this up right away on all platforms, and looking forward to next week.
Looking forward to it. See you guys later.
See ya.